with you. A future invasion of Israel by a number of very interesting named countries who will be defeated and destroyed on the plains and the mountains of Israel. Well, what is that? Looking through Jewish eyes, we can now find out exactly what was written 2,600 years ago. Out of today's headlines, well, who are those guys? First of all, Rosh, Meshach, Tubal. Any idea who that would be? Does it sound like anything? Let's look at the Greek. If in the Greek, this is Hebrew, but in the Greek, Rosh becomes Rus, R-U-S. Meshach becomes Damaskoi. Tubal is Tubalsk. Russia, Moscow, Siberia. 2,600 years ago. Coincidence? Well, I can tell you this, the rabbis, for hundreds of years, from the time they were dispersed in 70 AD until 1948, believed that this passage guaranteed a future return to the land because some future czar, if you would, of Russia, in their frame of reference, some future czar of Russia would have to come and invade a regathered Israel. This is what they believed for centuries. Let's go on. Persia. You know who Persia is? Do we have any philatelists here? Philatelists? You might not want to admit that, right? No, it's stamp collectors. Do we have any stamp collectors here? A stamp collector, philatelist. If you collected Iranian stamps, it would say Persian Post on it. Persia is Iran. It's the nation of Iran. What about Cush? Well, Cush, at the time of Ezekiel, was all that the Jews knew about what is today sub-Saharan Black Africa. It was the land of Ethiopia. In other words, sub-Saharan Black Africa. Put would have been, in the time of Ezekiel, North Africa. The Arab nations, Libya specifically, and the Arab nations. Gomer, well, that's an interesting one. If you watch MeTV, you watch Gomer Pyle, but that's not what this is. Well, Gomer, if you spoke Yiddish, you'd get this one right away. Because in Yiddish, which is the European Hebrew language dialect, Gomer is Germany. And then you've got Beth Togarmah, and scholars are kind of divided on this one. It's the land to the north, and some have argued this would be Turkey, and others would say it's the Ukraine. Now, to all these nations that I just shared with you, do they love Israel? So a big Russian niet. They do not. They do not. But here's the amazing part about it, folks. It wasn't always so. And this is the thing that I think is so amazing, and I want to share with you in the next few minutes. Because this, to me, is absolutely startling. It can't be a coincidence. Let's start with the Soviet Union. Start with Russia. Soviet Union literally bankrolled 5 wars against the state of Israel. They bankrolled the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. They bankrolled the Suez War of 1956. They bankrolled the Arabs in the Six-Day War of 1967. They bankrolled the Egyptian and Syrian Jordanian attack on Yom Kippur in 1973. And the First Lebanon War of 1982. They lost all of them. The Jews won every one of them. And then the Russians would turn around and rearm the Arabs once again for the next war. All bankrolled by the Russians. But then something strange happened. It's not hard to see how the Soviet Union didn't like Israel, but then you had the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, and subsequently they've had peaceful relations. Now, I wouldn't say they're buddies in any stretch of the imagination, but there's been free travel now. The Jews have been allowed to emigrate from Russia. They were not allowed to under the communist system, to go back to the land, to Israel. It's been peaceful. But now here's the thing. Billy Mays would say, but wait, and this is what it is. The Lord said, I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army. And then it struck me. Russia first, the Soviet Union first had to fall and be peaceful with Israel before the Lord could put hooks in their jaws and make them do a 180 and come at them again. This couldn't have happened unless the Soviet Union had fallen first. Well, let's see what's going on now. Hooks in their jaws. Syria, right now, 2016, as we sit here, Aleppo, you hear about that every night of the news. For the first time in history, and they've wanted it ever since the first czars, for the first time in history, Russia now has significant boots on the ground in the Middle East. It's the first time they've ever had a large military presence in the Middle East. It's always been prevented by the Western powers throughout all of history, whether it was the Napoleonic Wars, whether it was the Russo-Turkish Wars, whether it was World War I, World War II. They've never been able to get foot in the Middle East until now. And it's immediately adjacent to where? The mountains of Israel. That's where Syria is located. Immediately adjacent to the mountains of Israel. So Russian troops in Damascus. Meanwhile, in the United States, this is from Al Jazeera. It's interesting to take an Arab take on what's going on. As the U.S. falters, Russia becomes both judge and executioner in Syria. Russia has totally filled a vacuum caused by the United States vacating Iraq and vacating really its responsibilities in the Middle East, and now trying to go back and figure out what to do. This is from the Washington Post, certainly not a conservative digest, but look what it says. Talks on Syria's civil war among Russia, the U.S., and Middle East powers ended without result amid a warning in Moscow that the risk of conflict is increasing between the two former Cold War rivals. This is just yesterday. Yesterday, the Washington Post. This was the day before yesterday. Fear of a war with the Soviet Union, between the United States and the Soviet Union. How did it come to this? How did the fall of the Soviet Union under Ronald Reagan and George Bush, how did it come to this? Amazing. This is another very interesting cartoon. News item, President considering bombing Syria. Whose side are we on? I don't know. That's kind of what it seems like. What about Persia, Iran? Does anybody know who this gentleman was? The Shah of Iran. Yes, thank you, the Shah of Iran. Now, the Shah of Iran is rather interesting. He was a Muslim, and yet he had great respect for the state of Israel. Iran was one of two Muslim nations. I don't want to say Arab because the Persians, the Iranians do not consider themselves Arabs, they're Persians. But there were only two Muslim nations in the Middle East and North Africa. Actually, there were three, excuse me, that did not declare war on Israel in 1948. One was Iran, the other were the kingdoms of Morocco and Tunisia. But what happened is he actually had diplomatic relations with Israel. There was an Iranian embassy in Israel. And there was an Israeli embassy in Iran, in Tehran. They had commercial trade agreements. They were friendly. They had friendly relations. Remember, hooks in your jaws. And then what happened? You know who this guy was? The Ayatollah Khomeini. How many of you remember the under Carter's years, the Iran hostage crisis? Persia, Iran, building a strong military, building a missile system, and trying feverishly to build a nuclear capacity. And then, of course, we have Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad, during his time as the Prime Minister of Iran, had as his #1 priority setting the stage for the return of the Imam Mahdi. The Imam Mahdi is the Messiah of Islam. Now, follow with this one. This is something which, again, right out of, you can't make this up, and this is exactly what's going on in Iran today. The 12th Imam, called the rightly guided one. Now, the Muslims believe, that this is the Shiites, that a man by the name of Abu Qasim Muhammad was the 12th and final Imam directly descended from the Prophet Muhammad. Imam means the rightly guided one. You had to be a direct descendant of Muhammad, and he's the number 12 in the rotation. They believe that he disappeared as a child in the year 941 AD, or 373 after the Hijra, which is the Muslim way of reckoning, and entered what they call, get this, occultation in time and space. In other words, he's in suspended animation somewhere, in occultation, waiting to be reanimated and brought back. Kind of like Ted Williams' head, right? or Walt Disney somewhere underneath Disneyland. Okay, I'm sorry. But here he is, and they're waiting for him to physically return to Earth in the last days. In the last days, as the Mahdi. He's the Muslim Messiah. The Mahdi will lead the world into an age of Islamic justice. It's kind of an oxymoron, in my opinion, Islamic justice. He will reign, get this, where have we read this before? He will reign for 7 years before the final judgment day. Now, these are the 12 Imams in order. They all kind of look alike. And this is the Jamkaran Mosque in Qam, Iran, a suburb of Tehran. Kind of looks like Las Vegas or Disneyland or something, doesn't it? Well, this is a very unique property within Iran. The Shiite Muslims believe that the Mahdi will reappear at the Jamkaran Mosque on a future Tuesday. Maybe tonight's Tuesday night. Why it's a Tuesday, I haven't been able to ascertain. But every Tuesday night, Shiites, the faithful, gather there waiting for the Mahdi. And what he's going to do is come up out of a well that he disappeared in as a child when he went into occultation, when he went into hiding. And what they do in the interim is the Muslims that come place petitions into the sacred well from which he will eventually emerge, believing that the Mahdi will grant their request. Kind of like a, dare I say, wishing well. Okay? It is reported that Ahmadinejad also has placed numerous petitions into the holy well, including a petition asking the Imam to bless Iran's nuclear weapons program. And as he said, in his own words, Iran has become nuclear before their very eyes, despite their will. We behold the hands of the Imam. In one of his first official acts after assuming office, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad donated nearly $20 million to support the mosque in preparation for the coming of the Mahdi. This is his words. Our revolution's main mission, their main purpose as a government, is to pave the way for the reappearance of the 12th Imam, the Mahdi. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the United States president said, the main mission of the United States is to prepare the way of the Lord? I mean, think about this. And it was like that once. It was like that once. Amazingly, the Shiites believe that in the last days, and get this, folks, hold on to your yarmulkes here, the Mahdi is going to fight Dajjal, the evil one. And he's going to be assisted by Isa, his right-hand man. You know who Isa is? Isa is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He's the second highest prophet in Islam, the understudy of the Mahdi, of Muhammad and the Mahdi. They believe that Jesus is going to come back and tell the Christians that the Muslims were right all along, and that he's going to accompany the Mahdi to Mecca and walk around the Kaaba 7 times, as all Muslims are supposed to do once in their life, and make Hajj to Mecca, and proclaim that Islam is the only way. This blasphemous billboard showing a Muslim Jesus behind the Imam Mahdi is situated in downtown Tehran. It was completed just 2 years ago in late 2014. Let that sink in. This is what it looks like on the street. Downtown Tehran. A picture of Jesus following the Mahdi. Wow. Behold a white horse, and he that sat on him went forth conquering and to conquer. Revelation 6:2. And this is the mosque again. He is coming. They're not talking about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ when they posted that. In 2005, Ahmadinejad made an address before the United Nations. Before, if you would, all the nations of the world. And this is what he said in his closing of his address. He prayed, Almighty Lord, I pray to you to hasten the emergence of your last repository, the promised one, that perfect and pure human being, the one that will fill the world with justice and peace, the Mahdi. Wow. And for those of you that still aren't buying this, this is the Iran hostage crisis. And there's Ahmadinejad as one of the students that broke into the United States Embassy. Ahmadinejad also said Iran will not retreat from its nuclear path. President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad vowed Wednesday that Iran won't retreat 1 iota from its nuclear program, denying claims that it seeks atomic weapons. Get this, its key ally, where have I heard Russia before, gave the Islamic Republic a major boost, rejecting tighter sanctions despite a UN watchdog report detailing suspected arms-related advances. Russia, which has veto-wielding power on the UN Security Council, said new sanctions would be unacceptable. Any additional sanctions against Iran would be perceived by the international community as an instrument for regime change in Tehran, Deputy Foreign Minister Gadaloff told the Interfax news agency, adding that Russia does not intend to consider such proposals. There's Putin and Ahmadinejad. So meanwhile, with all these treaties and all these guarantees, the nuclear clock keeps ticking. Tick, tick, tick. And the United Nations and the United States does nothing. Maybe less than nothing. It's actually paved the way for us. Hooks in your jaws? I would say very clearly, hooks in their jaws. Iran. This is Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Kush, of Ethiopia. He was the last emperor. He was a Christian. He was a Coptic Christian. He has a lot of awards on his chest, as you can see. But the one that he was most proud of was the one that denoted him as the Lion of Judah. He proclaimed himself to be the Lion of Judah. The reason was he believed that he was a direct descendant, the 256th direct descendant, if anybody's counting, of a union between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. And according to Ethiopian tradition, the Keber Nagas, which is their national epic, they believe that Solomon and Sheba had a child, and he was Menelik the first emperor of Ethiopia, first emperor of Kush. And he basically, according to their tradition, adopted Judaism, was Jewish. And throughout all of history, Ethiopia has been first a Jewish state, and then later a Christian state, with still many Jews living in the land of Ethiopia. Rather unique in Africa. And what's really kind of interesting about that is it's a form of Judaism that literally stood still since the 6th century BC, which is the time when it apparently was first adopted. So it really is kind of an amazing thing historically. Now, he, of course, had no problem with Israel. He loved Israel. He believed he was Jewish himself, a Falasha, a black Jew. He was overthrown by Mengistu, one of his own soldiers, who was a communist. Mengistu overthrew him and personally murdered him in his sleep. The story is that he put a pillow over the emperor's face and suffocated him to death and took over the country. He's an atheist, a communist. Israel then, because of the persecution that was taking place on the black Jews, the Falashas actually borrowed two or three United States C-5A transport planes, humongous planes, and they literally airlifted out in three separate occasions, 84, 91, and 99, over 70,000 black Jews and brought them to the state of Israel. Because any Jew anywhere in the world automatically can claim homeland citizenship in Israel. When you go to Israel today, you'll see a number of young black people who are black Jews who are second or even third generation Falashas. The first time I went in 1999, we had a security person came on our bus who was someone who had been airlifted out of Ethiopia, was a black Jew. Meanwhile, Ethiopia, terribly anti-Jewish, anti-Christian, here's Mengistu with one of his heroes, Fidel Castro. And all of black Africa, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the United Nations just a couple of days ago with this vote on the Temple Mount, always driven by the incredible amount of votes that the African nations have because there's so many countries there. Between the Arab nations and the African nations, they have such a huge voting bloc, and they completely vote as a bloc anti-Israel. Now, why Nigeria would vote anti-Israel, I have no idea, but they vote as a bloc. Kush turned hooks in their jaws, turned them around. Did I hear? Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Left it really off. Yes. No, he's not anymore, but it is still a Marxist regime. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sorry. Question was, is he still a dictator? No, he's gone, but it's a successor. It's still a Marxist state. Here's the head of China in Zambia, inspecting the troops. And again, there's all throughout Africa. There's again a lot of socialism, a lot of okay. I won't even begin to wonder what that was. Mengistu. So hooks in their jaws.
Yeah.
Yes?
In Ethiopia, if they were formerly Jewish, or a good part of, I saw something on DVD or whatever
About the ark?
about the ark,
Yeah.
and they've got a guard going around it,
Yeah.
and
Marilyn, we've done that here a couple of times on the Ark of the Covenant, and that some believe, myself included, that it's in Ethiopia. That's another study for another time. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that the Ethiopians actually have the Ark of the Covenant, and this goes all the way back, really all the way back to the time of. Really, it would be after the time of King Hezekiah and at the time of King Manasseh, when he desecrated the temple. And there's a lot of argument that the priests actually spirited the ark out, and it ended up, long story, but again, you're absolutely right, that the ark may very well be in Ethiopia. Oh, okay. Now this man here was King Idris, the last king of Libya. Does Libya like Israel? Well, certainly not. But at that time, believe it or not, Libya had peaceful relations with Israel itself. And he was a king, and he really didn't care either way. They never really went to war with Israel. That was the country, not Tunisia, it was Libya, that didn't declare war in 1948. The largest United States Air Force base in the world, outside of America itself, was in Libya. Believe it or not, near Benghazi, the Wheelus Air Force Base. Do you have any Air Force people here? Okay. The thing is, it was the largest U.S. Air Force base outside the United States, under Idris. Pro-Western. Hooks in their jaws. This guy overthrew him, Muammar Gaddafi. And you know the rest there. So here you have put Libya and the Arab nations. Hooks in their jaws, a complete turnaround. This is a rather interesting picture. This was Gaddafi when he was proclaimed the King of Kings. The King of Kings. If we could stretch this picture out about a mile in either direction, there were some 300 different chiefs from the various tribes all throughout the African continent that came to pay homage to Gaddafi as the King of Kings. And they proclaimed him King of Kings. And he was proclaimed the head of the African Union. You've heard, of course, about the European Union. Well, Africa now is trying to do the same thing, where all the nations will have a common trade, a common currency, common language, and a common military. And, of course, a common enemy. And guess who that is? Certainly it's Israel. So Gaddafi was proclaimed King of Kings. Now, at his very first meeting, presiding over the African Union's meeting, his very first one as president, Gaddafi invited only 2 non-African leaders to attend. Only 2 that were not Africans. What's that?
Bill Clinton?
Oh, it wasn't Bill Clinton. No, it was a very good guess, though. Okay, Ahmadinejad, and remember who this is? The late, great Hugo Chavez from Venezuela. Clearly, there was an agenda here. Anti-American, to say the least, anti-Israel, to say the most. Now, as Billy May would say again, but wait, here he is, Billy May. Gaddafi's gone. Gaddafi's gone, so that should be the end of that problem. But is it? Is it maybe even worse now? This is Libya in October of 2011. The interim leader, Mustafa Abdel Jalil, after overthrowing Gaddafi, announced the immediate imposition of Sharia law. Any law that violates Sharia is null and void legally. As bad as Gaddafi was, they didn't have Sharia law in Libya until after they overthrew him. Meanwhile, Iran's government hailed what it called the total liberation of the country and urged Libya to proceed with creating a Sharia state. No love among thieves here. Here the Iranians were actually glad Gaddafi got overthrown, and the people that took over were more to Iran's liking. Perhaps a lot worse. And we know what happened next. Benghazi. Hooks in your jaws? Once again, totally turned around. Hooks in their jaws. What about Gomer, Germany? Well, there's never been a more anti-Semitic country in the history of the world. And what's amazing now is it's happening all over again. This is from the Washington Post, this last year. Berlin. The rest of Europe may see a crisis as a record number of asylum seekers flood the continent from Syria and other pockets of conflict and poverty. But Germany, the region's economic powerhouse, is also sensing a golden opportunity. Offering some of the most generous terms of asylum, Germany has become by far the biggest host in Europe for those fleeing dangerous and deteriorating conditions, with more than 800,000 applications expected this year alone. Oops. Wait, time out. Chancellor Angela Merkel, meanwhile, is preparing for a public for a period of transformation. Get this. Transformation that may alter the very definition of what it means to be a German. Some leaders in the region are sounding the alarm over the threat to national identities posed by the mostly Muslim newcomers. But Merkel is cajoling Germans to embrace a new vision of their country that in the future may not be as white or as Christian as it is today. Welcoming that. No more Oktoberfest. Ramadan instead. And of course, anti-Semitism is now widely going on in Germany once again. Angela Merkel. Bet the Garma, could it be Turkey or the Ukraine? Scholars are mixed on this, but they both are excellent candidates. What about Turkey? Turkey has a choice right now. And in fact, it was in the news this week because it was sending troops in against the Kurds, because the Kurds are being lined up with us to fight ISIS, but the Turks hate the Kurds, and the Turks are our allies in NATO. So try figuring out what all this means. There's nobody in control of this situation, except for Putin. He's the only one that's getting what he wants. Turkey can either align with the West, and it wants to. Turkey wants to align with the European community. But the European community has kept them out, has prevented their membership. And the reason they claim is one that's dear to my heart, I wrote a book on it, is the Armenian genocide of 1915. That until they admit it was a genocide, they're not going to let them in. Now that's bogus. They couldn't care less about the Armenian genocide of 1915. They don't want a country coming in that's going to bring down the economic value as Greece did a couple of years ago. Turkey is not up to the same economic standards as Germany or France or whatever. And that's what it's all about. Now with London, with England leaving it, you can see it's just fragmented. So what's your other choice? Go east. Go east with their Muslim brethren. This is a really interesting slide if you look at this. This is pan-Turkism. These are all the Turkic peoples of the world. And this is what Turkey envisions as the united Turkish world. Pan-Turks, that is. People that are Pan-Turks. You want to read about that? I've got a book for you. Here's Erdogan and Putin. He's now become the strongman of Turkey and has completely cracked down on all opposition. You know about the coup that took place last summer, and he succeeded to put it down and has completely cracked down and has complete power over the Turks. Then there's the Ukraine. Well, the Ukraine, situated next to the Soviet Union, next to the old Soviet Union, it was a part of the old Soviet Union. So prior to 1991, this prophecy of Ezekiel could not have been fulfilled because the Ukraine didn't stand alone. It wasn't its own country. It was part of the Soviet Union. So I would argue the Soviet Union first had to fall for the Ukraine to become a country again so that it could then join this coalition. Well, it's going to join it whether it wants to or not, because what happened is Russia invaded the Ukraine and took parts of it back, took the Crimea. There was actually an election in the Ukraine as to which way they wanted to go, pro-Western or pro-Russian. And you can see west or east, you can see where the votes lined it up. The blue were pro-Russian votes, and these were by various degrees pro-Western votes. And then, of course, there was rioting and fighting in the Ukraine, and Putin succeeded in putting his own surrogate in power as the president of the Ukraine. Soviet tanks marched in 2014, and my thing is getting a little ahead of me here. Vladimir Putin shown here celebrating Victory Day in the Crimea, May 9th, 2014. And I love this next slide. Not Ukraine, my crane. I'm sorry. Google does have some great stuff. Here's the Holocaust Monument in Odessa, Ukraine. The Holocaust Memorial desecrated with swastikas on April 8, 2014. The night of Passover. Ukraine, April 14, 2014, Passover Eve. An edict went out that day from the local Odessan government that all Jews in the city had to register. Just like in Nazi Germany. This is a frightening development in the anti-Jewish movement that is gaining traction around the world. Morton Klein, president of the Zionist Organization of America. So are these then a coalition of all of the evil nations in Ezekiel 38? Every one of them had peaceful relations with Israel, and every one of them now is averse, has had hooks put in their jaws. And even Russia has again had the hooks put in their jaws, as is evidenced by now their incursions into Syria. Hooks in their jaws. So God's judgment, this is what the sovereign Lord says, "On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you." Russia, Iran, the Arab nations, African Union, Germany, Turkey, the Ukraine. Quickly, I want to show you the war of Psalm 83. Once again, written thousands of years ago. A song, a psalm of Asaph. "O God, do not remain silent. Do not turn a deaf ear. Do not stand aloof, O God. See how your enemies growl, how your foes rear their heads. With cunning they conspire against your people. They plot against those you cherish. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation, so that Israel's name is remembered no more. With one mind they plot together. They form an alliance against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagrites, Byblos, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the people of Tyre. Even Assyria has joined them to reinforce Lot's descendants. Do to them as you did to Midian. Make them like tumbleweed, my God, like chaff before the wind. As fire consumes the forest or a flame sets the mountains ablaze, so pursue them with your tempest and terrify them with your storm." These ancient lands, if we look through Jewish eyes, come right out of today's headlines. Assyria is modern-day Syria. Tyre, Sidon is Lebanon. Ammon, Edom or Moab is modern-day Jordan. Babylon is Iraq. Midian was Saudi Arabia. The Hagrites or the Hagarenes, modern-day Egypt. The Ishmaelites, the Arabs, and perhaps even ISIS. And Philistia, Arab Palestine. Well, what of Syria? Damascus, Syria claims to be the world's oldest continuously populated city. Here's what Scripture says. Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. Isaiah 17. A heap of ruins. What of Sidon, Lebanon? I'm against you, O Sidon, and I will gain glory within you. They will know that I am the Lord when I inflict punishment on her. The slain will fall within her, with the sword against her on every side. What of Ammon, Jordan? The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will sound the battle cry against the Ammonites. It will become a mound of ruins, and its surrounding villages will be set on fire. Edom will become an object of horror, like a lion coming up from Jordan's thickets to a rich pasture land. I will chase Edom from its land in an instant. In an instant. Dateline, Amman, September 2015. Jordan's king warned Israel on Monday that any further provocation in Jerusalem, where Israeli police have clashed with Muslims at Al-Aqsa Mosque, would damage ties between the two countries, which have a 1994 peace accord. King Abdullah II warned Jordan will not have a choice but to take action. Hooks in their jaws. What of Midian, Saudi Arabia? He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed. His ways are eternal. I saw the dwellings of Midian in anguish. Habakkuk. The ancient mountains crumbled. What of Egypt? An oracle concerning Egypt. See, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and is coming to Egypt. The idols of Egypt tremble before him, and the hearts of the Egyptians melt within them. The waters of the Nile River will dry up, and the riverbed will be parched and dry, from Isaiah. A nuclear cloud to melt Egypt? I wonder. None of these things have happened yet, but they're all prophesied against nations that are going to line up against Israel in Psalm 83. What of Babylon, Iraq? I think there's two parts to this. I think pre-tribulational, concerning Babylon and the land of the Babylonians, a nation from the north will attack her and lay waste her land. An alliance of great nations from the land of the north, from Jeremiah. I believe that took place. The United States and her allies in the two Iraqi wars. But Iraq is still there, and Iraq is falling back into Muslim extremism. Islam, or ISIS, is controlling much of Iraq. So post-rapture, Babylon will suddenly fall and be broken, for her judgment reaches